I want to clear up a misunderstanding at the end of my last video when I referred to my audience as being 4,000 soldiers. What I received a lot of is I'm not your soldier, we're not your personal army. What I meant is, I had a desired task, and I am only one person. My efforts as an individual really doesn't add up to much, but you people, an audience of 4,000, you, as a combined force, have the power, not me. You are the army, we are the army. I am not a one-man army. If something is going to get done, don't stand around waiting for me to do it. You have to do this. You, us, we have to do this. And I am glad I have the ear of 4,000 people. And what I mean by that is, I am standing here preaching an idea. If you agree with the idea, then act on it. The power is in your hands, not mine. The reason I used the word soldier was to imply that you should take an active role in activism, rather than the passive spectator role. And the reason is simple. Let's just say 4,000 people hear me, and agree with me, and say that's right RBK, get it done. I can't get anything done. I'm one man, who has no power. I am not a politician or the owner of a corporation. If you agree that something needs to get done, the responsibility is in your hands. The power is in your hands. Another meaning behind soldier, is that we should view ourselves as an army fighting the good fight, not a group of disenfranchised audience members grumbling and kicking a can in frustration, or cheering on someone else. I mean, it's not enough to be an audience member at this football game. Get out of the audience and onto the field. Be proactive. Think of yourself and your fellow MRA as an active participant. There also seems to be some confusion on my use of the term ideological purification. Some people have chose to interpret that as me saying my way or the highway, and no, that is not what I am talking about. In fact, I had assumed I made it clear when I said I understood the danger of that very thing, of becoming the cult of exclusivity, an echo chamber. What I meant was, oh, how can I explain this? Let me try like this. Our movement is being hijacked, and I am not using hysterical hyperbolic language. I am dead serious. It is in serious threat of being hijacked. Whether the hijackers themselves are aware of their actions or not, it's still happening. What we have is a flood of libertarianism in the movement telling us to knock off our silly MRA and MGTOW bullshit, and just be libertarians. To make matters worse, many of these so-called libertarians are actually anarcho-capitalists using the term libertarianism. On top of this, many of the supporters for these anarcho-capitalists in libertarian clothing are actually left-wing anarchists. True anarchy is left-wing, it rejects property rights and capitalism. Furthermore, there is what I believe to be a conscious and deliberate effort to hijack MGTOW into nothing more than vanilla libertarianism. The fact that the MGTOW philosophy leads many to a certain lone wolf and bachelor lifestyle means for the most part, MGTOW is very compatible with anti-statism and thus libertarianism. Thus libertarianism and MGTOW have a lot in common, and this commonality is being used to hijack MGTOW. So what we have is left-wing anarchists piggybacking off of right-wing anarcho-capitalism, which is piggybacking off of libertarianism, which is piggybacking off of MGTOW, which is piggybacking off of the MRM, which is then often conflated with being anti-feminism, which is just a fancy way of saying right-wing conservative, which of course has pro-marriage rocking mystery family values as its unwavering core, and all of this gets lumped together as the men's movement or the manosphere. When I say this is piggybacking off of that, I mean here in the men's movement, I say it is time we put things into perspective, and figure out exactly what we in this movement are even trying to accomplish. I'm not saying we all have to approach our goal with an identical approach. I'm saying we have to at least agree on what the goal itself is. We cannot have conservative family values, you know, women leaving the workforce to stay home and make babies and be sheltered from dangerous male responsibility and keep their legs closed until marriage, and at the same time have go your own way, avoid marriage, being a part of the exact same movement. This is not a matter of bickering over how to best achieve our goal. This is a matter of bickering about what the actual goal is. This is what I mean by purification, to take this clump of contradicting ideologies, and melt down the clump, separating the different ideologies, and making it clear what the goal of the men's rights movement is. Forgive me if I am coming off as too big for my britches and trying to speak for the whole MRM, but for crying out loud, the men's rights movement is not about defeating statism, and MGTOW is not about rocking mysteries family values. Can we at least agree with this? Here is an example, a picture-perfect example of the problem I am talking about. This comment was left on my last video within 10 or 20 minutes of me posting it.
I wholeheartedly welcome libertarians, as they present the only viable solution to the problems correctly perceived by the MRM. Feminism is a creature of statism. Every significant feminist victory has been achieved and maintained through state violence. Yes, in the absence of government coercion, sexual dimorphism will still exist, but it will manifest quite differently in a world where all adult relationships are voluntary. And, when you get right down to it, isn't that all MRAs really want?
How is this not hijacking? He just said libertarianism is the only viable solution. That means men's rights activism is stupid and useless. It means MGTOW is completely useless. It has no reason, no function, it's useless. MRM and MGTOW can't fix the problems we are trying to fix according to him. Only libertarianism can. Also, it's a creature of statism. This really translates to, don't blame women, or gynocentric behavior manifesting in both men and women. It's all about the statism. It is obvious, all of MGTOW philosophy and men's rights activism is pointless. We're wasting our time. Just give up this silly bullshit of ours and be a libertarian. That's the message here. And why is it that little to no one is calling him out on this attack against the MRM? You know, if some female just said feminism is the only viable way to obtain gender equality, we'd have swarmed on the bitch and told her to stick it where the sun don't shine. But how come we didn't do it here? It is my personal opinion we did not do it because he masked his assault on the MRM using the label libertarian, and there are far too many MRAs and MGTOW who identify as libertarian, and therefore didn't attack one of their own. Or just the fact that when someone appears to be pro-libertarian, causes a feeling of ease and ideological kinship, and so we didn't really notice the attack. And while he did not say it's not women, it's just statism, but instead said feminism is a creature of statism, I can't help but compare this to someone saying women aren't the enemy, feminism is the enemy. Here we have feminism isn't the enemy, statism is the enemy. Now granted, I am straw-manning, because he didn't technically say that, but it's a vibe I have gotten from his statement, and so many other statements from his kind. The statement all we have to do is fight statism is a very common and loud statement I hear a lot of in this movement, and I am sorry, but I disagree that we need to chuck all this pointless MGTOW and MRM bullshit, and just end statism. Next he makes another post and says this.
Again, the primary grievances of the MRA, family and divorce courts, dominant aggressor policies for domestic abuse, lack of due process for rape accusations, incommensurate selective service obligations, sexual harassment policies created as a defense against lawsuits, etc., are only made possible because government exists, because we suffer under an institution that declares the right to initiate force against others. If you think the real enemy is the sum total of millions of years of natural selection, then good luck with that battle. Maybe take on gravity next. Without a doubt, women are guilty of taking advantage of the current system. And MGTOW makes as much sense as a fugitive slave heading north of the Mason-Dixon line. But these are all still fundamentally situations that would not be possible without the state and its capacity for violence.
Family and divorce courts, libertarianism wouldn't end this. There is marriage, property, and child custody. This would still exist in a small government society. Maybe the courts and the divorce process would be faster and cheaper, but ultimately, this does nothing to stop some white knight judge from handing child custody to your ex-wife. It also does nothing to stop her from making up any kind of allegation of abuse and damages that has to be paid for by the redistribution of your wealth to pay for your crime. Dominant aggressor policies for domestic abuse. It's still illegal to hit people in a libertarian society. There are still cops, judges and jails. Currently, domestic violence includes hitting, threatening, yelling, withholding sex, withholding money, having a separate bank account, shaming, name-calling, and a whole host of other non-physical things, widely open to interpretation, and by default, only applies when men do it. What is to stop the non-aggression principle from getting hijacked the same way, and reinterpreted to include every displeasing thing a man does, while calling every act of female aggression an act of defense? The NAP, like any other rule or principle, can be reinterpreted to mean anything. See every fucking religion ever conceived, as evidence. Lack of due process for rape accusations. There are still cops, judges and jails in a libertarian society. A woman points her finger and says he raped me. What about the government being small? Guarantees no bias in court. Nothing. Remember, we already have laws written down stating innocent until proven guilty, fair trial, etc. The problem is, what is written on paper, and how people interpret these things, are two different things. Furthermore, what is to stop corporations and universities from erecting zero-tolerance sexual harassment policies that target men? Nothing. Small government doesn't make that problem go away. Incommensurate selective service obligations. I had to look up incommensurate. It basically means double standard. Okay, if there is no draft, then men and women are equally not drafted. So I'll actually give you that one. Sexual harassment policies created as a defense against lawsuits. What is to stop feminist pressure groups from applying pressure to corporations? How does small government automatically erase laws that say employers are held responsible for crimes committed by employees on corporate time? What's to stop feminists in these corporations from talking about how sexual harassment, in some way, shape or form, is hurting business, and a zero-tolerance policy, targeting men of course, would boost better production? What is to stop these insurance companies from calculating damages caused by sexual assault victims, and demanding companies create sexual harassment policies or raise the cost of insurance? You're making the mistake of seeing how feminists have taken the easiest, quickest path to implementing their will, using government, and believing the reduction or abolishing of government would fix the problem. No, they just use other means, because statism isn't the problem. Women, gynocentrism, is the problem. In a libertarian society, there are still corporations, and thus advertising, marketing, publicity, public relations, all of these things easily influenced by a feminist boycott or protest. And the thing is, there will be no men's movement to counter boycott and counter protest, because we don't need a men's movement, just a small government libertarian movement. See the problem? Do you see the problem of saying, oh, it's just statism we have to fight? This, people, is why I am trying to alert everyone to the hijacking, and how damaging it can be. We all jumped Woolly Bumblebee's shit when she said it's not women, it's feminism, yet we only slightly object to it's not women, it's communism, and we are apparently not objecting at all when we hear it's not women, it's statism. Now allow me to do a preemptive strike here. If I don't say anything, here are the guaranteed arguments I will get to my arguments. Blank wouldn't happen because there would be no one to initiate force on behalf of the complainant, which is not a libertarian argument, but instead an anarchist argument, and that's a serious problem. We have anarchists and libertarians synergistically feeding off of one another. First it starts with a libertarian argument, then it becomes an anarchist argument, and when you try to argue the leftist anarchist, you then get told you're wrong because their utopia has this and that property right clause, and you realize you are now talking to a right-wing anarcho-capitalist. And that is one of the most frustrating things about having to deal with these people. You are trying to argue against validity of a libertarian utopia, and then you get argued by someone changing the rules to defeat your argument by inserting their anarcho-capitalist utopian rules, and then when you try to argue that, you get argued by someone changing the rules to meet their left-wing anti-capitalist anarchist utopia. You can't reason with these libertarians and anarchists because they keep telling you, in their perfect utopian world, this gender inequality MRAs are bitching about wouldn't happen because of this and that rule, but the rule is gender neutral and does not recognize gynocentrism, thus there is nothing to stop these rules from getting reinterpreted in a female-favored way. Rules and policies get corrupted, it's an eternal fact of life. Every rule or policy can get hijacked and corrupted by women. Just because they can't run to the government doesn't mean they can't get favoritism some other way. And that is the danger of ignoring gynocentrism, and this is the impossibility of trying to win an argument with these people. They keep referring to a future utopia, a fictional and theoretical state that you can't argue against since it's their theoretical world, and they will make up the theoretical outcome of any situation and remind you that absence of proof is not proof of absence, and you just have to take their word for it that everything will work out all gender neutral and equal. Again, you can't point out examples of them being wrong, because you can only point to examples from the now, the present, the real world, to which they will find some convoluted reasoning that it's only because of government. You can't point to how something won't work in a future utopia that already doesn't fucking exist to begin with. It's a fictional future, a future that even if it can happen, hasn't actually happened yet, thus is theoretical. They are the ones preaching the beauty of this paradise and making up the rules and outcome as they go along. You can't win an argument against that. And the truly eerie thing is, the libertarian, the minarchist, the anarcho-capitalist, and the leftist anarchist, all of which have anywhere from slightly differing, to radically differing rules, will all conveniently not argue against each other, but remain conspicuously silent on each other's contradictions, and focus on how to use the rules of their personal and different, bullshit utopia, to assure you everything will be a perfectly workable paradise. And I'll be honest, I don't know if this happens in anarchist circles, or if this is just the bullshit that happens in the MRM space. I would say it is a deliberate effort, a deliberate conspiratorial assault on the men's movement, a deliberate hijacking. I would say that, but frankly, there is nothing I have seen from these anarchists that imply they have the cohesive intelligence to pull that off. Let me give you an example of what I mean. In a pure anarchy, no government, no police, and no one, absolutely positively no one, having any sort of official authority. How do you get people to obey laws? What makes an anarchist think rules get obeyed without an enforcer of rules? Well, here, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of the awesome, jaw-dropping, mind-numbing stupidity of the anarchist on this very question.
But in simplest terms, you should at least know that anarchy does not mean chaos. It doesn't mean we all kill each other. Those are the lies that any government would tell you. Those are the lies that ignorant people will tell you. Those are the lies that, anyone who doesn't want you to think for yourself will tell you. Right? Anarchy, as you can see in this image, is basically just means no rulers, no masters. There are still rules, and you may wonder, well, how could there be rules if there's no masters or rulers? Well, let me go ahead and answer that a little bit. You see, in nature, right, if I jump off a cliff and hit the ground, say, what, 50 feet, right? I'm probably gonna die, right? Probably gonna die. See, that's a rule, right? And nobody made this rule. No ruler, no king, no god went ahead and said, hey, you're not allowed to jump 50 feet and live.
Yup, people don't need enforcers of rules to follow rules, because we don't need the government to enforce gravity, and the notion that people wouldn't just instinctively obey these natural law rules just like obeying gravity, is all a part of a government conspiracy. Well, god damn it, that's basically what he said. And the thing is, this is not an original argument from him alone. I have heard this argument several times, that gravity is a natural rule that humans are subject to, and do not need a ruler or enforcer to obey. They will remind you that cops, judges and jails have little to no effect on people obeying the rules. People don't obey the rules due to threats of violence, they do it naturally. After all, only 1% of crime is solved by cops. I honestly don't know if that is a real statistic or just the anarchist version of 1 in 4. They completely rule out the fact that even if cops don't solve every crime, their mere presence acts as a deterrent. After all, the evil big spooky government makes you pay your taxes, right? Isn't that all we hear these people squeal about time and time again? Is government uses force to make people pay taxes. Government uses force. Government uses force. Boo-hoo, government uses force. Hey, if your liberties are being taken away by a government threat of force, then how many liberties to steal, rob, murder, assault, and rape are also being taken away by threat of government force? You can't have it both ways. You can't have government makes people behave a certain way by threat of force and then turn around and say people do what people do because of nature, just like gravity doesn't need an enforcer to make you fall. Well, guess what? You'd still be paying taxes even without an enforcer, just like gravity makes you fall without government. The tired anarchist argument that gravity makes you fall, and getting rid of government won't change that, could equally be applied to you'd still be paying taxes. Getting rid of government wouldn't make that change. But that's when these people would argue that people are naturally good and well behaved and the threat of force or its absence wouldn't change a thing to make humanity behave any different. The only behavior the threat of force does encourage people to have is the bad stuff, but all the good stuff like not stealing, well, that part's just human nature. But the paying your taxes, that's not nature, that's government making that thing happen. Because it's my motherfucking make-believe world and I'll make up any rule I want, motherfucker. Fuck the MRM, fight government. Sorry, got a little carried away there arguing an imaginary opponent. But hey, if they can argue from the position of an imaginary world, I can argue from the position of an imaginary person. But enough of that, moving on. This is the anarchist libertarian utopian bullshit that our movement is infected with, telling us to quit fighting for fathers' rights if it involved an entitlement or corporate government regulation because that's statism. Ignore your silly gynocentric theory and petty fight for men's equality, and just focus on building a perfectly little utopia based on bullshit more fucking absurd than anything a creationist has ever said. Now let's take a look at a self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalist. Again, more nonsense about how fight for men's rights via men's rights activism is a fruitless endeavor. Just gotta shrink or abolish government. At least some of these people have the decency to admit they are not men's rights activists, which makes me wonder why the fuck they are even in our space. I don't go to their anarchist forums and push gynocentric theory on them, but what concerns me is how many of them frequent MRM and MGTOW space, agree with some or a lot of our views, giving us the impression they are one of us, and then objecting to something we say, and basing that objection on their utopian faith, or those who actually do wear the label MGTOW and MRA, all the while insisting the only type of MRM activism is that which is conducive to their utopian faith. And something I want to get across: what do you think about people who come into our space, tell us over and over to just fight government, just fight statism, And then when you explain this doesn't defeat gynocentrism, they basically say in one way or another that if our gynocentric theory has any merit it's undefeatable, so give it up now and just fight government. Would you not call the person an enemy? A person who tells us our movement has no chance of winning? If you agree that anyone that mocks and tells us we can't win, is an enemy, that's all I am saying. But the problem is, we have legit MRAs and MGTOW who will then take up for their anarchist and libertarian brothers, and then these anarchists and libertarians will take up for them, and they feed off of each other, causing a hijacking, and this is why we need to knock the shit off, you know, purify the movement instead of having these miscellaneous movements intertwined with our own, causing mission drift. I don't know if these anarchists are deliberately hijacking, intentional or unintentional, either way, it's the effect, and I am not one for believing in a conscious conspiracy. Because in my observation, unless huge sums of money are being dished out to shut people up and motivate them, people don't just up and cooperate like that, not unless there is money twisting their arm, so I doubt there is a conscious effort, but the effect is the same, and it's why I call for ideological purification. It is time that we looked at all the ideologies and filtered them, melting and smelting and separating them, otherwise, what we have is, leftist anarchists piggybacking on anarcho-capitalists, piggybacking on libertarians, piggybacking on MGTOW, piggybacking on MRM, piggybacking on anti-feminism, piggybacking on right-wing conservatism, all being lumped together as the men's movement. Like I said, the problem becomes that MGTOW is not a family values pro-marriage movement, and the men's rights movement is not an anti-statist libertarian movement. Rather than carefully working to clarify all the nuanced details of exactly when any one of these ideologies morphs into being another, it is easier just to point out what MRM is and what MGTOW is, and tell people in our space, you follow our rules and don't hijack. In MRM space, we fight for the equality of men, nothing else. We don't fight for big or small government, or corporation or a better economy. We're not fighting communism, we're not fighting for animal rights or gay rights, we're just fighting for men's rights, that's it, nothing more and nothing less. And when you use any of your other ideological principles to stand in the way of men pushing for rights, then you are effectively being anti-male whether or not you think so, feel so, or intend to. And MGTOW is a rejection of gynocentrism, typically, from the individual's mind and lifestyle. Libertarianism is a rejection of big government, among other things, while most people who identify as MGTOW, most likely would prefer more autonomy, individualism, and less government interference, thus making them very compatible with libertarian goals. MGTOW is not just a fancy new title meaning libertarian, it is something much bigger and deeper. What gets me is, a few years ago, didn't this movement have its panties in a bunch over the fear that accepting gays into our movement would result in a hijacking of the men's movement into the gay agenda? Wasn't the fear that we would get hijacked, we'd become one more LGBT, and yet where is this concern when we are actually having our movement hijacked by anarchists and other utopian idealists who insist that we abandon our current understanding and efforts, and join their utopian bullshit? Again, the idea that accepting what few gays would even want to be a part of this movement, would lead us all to being a bunch of prancing LGBT goers, completely hijacked from our mission. And yet here we are swarming with fucking anarcho-libertarians who are in fact acting as a roadblock and downright hijacking us, and nothing, no resistance to this hijacking. We got Bernard Chapin warning us that the leftists are going to hijack us, all the while he's hijacking us into right-wingism. We swarmed on the woolly bumblebee for saying women aren't the enemy, feminism is the enemy, but apparently we're just fucking cool with hearing women aren't the enemy, statism is the enemy. Don't look now folks, but I don't think we're being hijacked. I think we've already been hijacked, and just like we eventually settled down and said look, the gays can come here and be a part of our movement, but just don't turn this into all about my gayness because we are not going to have our movement turned into a platform for LGBT activism. You have an LGBT, go there, to do that shit. We said roughly the same thing to the women, you can be a part of this movement, so long as you do not hijack it with all about my vagina, and I am going to say that to anarchists and libertarians, you can be a part of this, just don't hijack it with all about my utopia, or all about my fear of statism, and I am going back to the idea of 4,000 soldiers. I can't fix this problem, I can't stop this hijacking, I can call it out when I see it, but who am I? I am one man, it is you, all of you, who are going to have to be proactive. When you see someone doing this, women aren't the enemy, gynocentrism isn't the problem, it's just statism, it's just big government. Call them out on it like you would any chick in the movement telling us it's not women, it's feminism, or communism. When you see these people post this shit somewhere, call them out on it. Keep the men's rights movement about men's rights, not the fight against communism or statism or any other hijacking bullshit. And just so that we are absolutely positively crystal clear, I am not saying libertarianism can't work. It can work. We can have a highly functioning society with a small government, extremely low taxes, and little to no entitlement programs and a massive reduction of bureaucracy and laws, and still be a technologically advanced functioning society. We can be a reasonably libertarian society, and I am not even against the principles of libertarianism. I am not in favor of big government, and I think all things being equal, a smaller government with less interference in our lives, is in fact ideal. I still carry with me the punk mentality of DIY do-it-yourself. I believe in removing as much corporate and government power as possible and putting as much power and means of production as possible in the hands of the individual. I'm the guy who could never be happy with a guitar unless I built and painted it myself. Still got warmoth.com saved in my browser favorites after all these years. I am all in favor of power to the people, and lone wolves, and individualism and do-it-yourself. I'm not against libertarianism. I am against libertarians hijacking this movement. Oh, and one more thing. I am against anarchists hijacking libertarianism, but that's not my problem. That's not my movement. I'm only concerned with the hijacking of my movement. And one last time, to my audience, I ask you, when you see any person pertaining to any ideology at all, saying it's not women, it's statism, or it's not gynocentrism, it's government, when you see them making those statements, or statements of that nature, call them out on it, be vocal. Don't let them hijack our movement. And to any anarchist or libertarian who is just unaware that you are hijacking, now you know, so stop it. Piggybacking.